Hi everyone, my name is Linda Wisdow, and I've created this video to tell you a little bit about my experience with a rather difficult transition through menopause, and to read a few excerpts from a memoir I've written about that experience. The title of the memoir is Menopause in Crisis: When Spiritual Emergency Meets the Feminine Midlife Passage. That's quite a title. It was quite an experience. Each year, millions of women around the world reach the age of menopause, that pivotal feminine threshold when the menstrual cycles cease. While many of these women are able to breeze through this time of transition with little more than a few hot flashes and maybe an episode or two of moodiness, for some it can be far more challenging. According to recent statistics, 15 to 20% of women going through the change will experience such intense physical and emotional upheaval that their lives come to a complete standstill, leaving many with the overwhelming fear that they are losing their minds. I was one of these women. In 2005, at the age of 46, I began plummeting into an experience that would turn my whole world upside down, that would turn my family's whole world upside down. An experience that traditional medicine would most likely classify as something akin to a nervous breakdown. My resting pulse, which was usually around 65 beats per minute or so, began pounding at a constant 90 to 95, sometimes even higher. My blood pressure, which was usually around 110/65, began skyrocketing to readings as high as 178/100. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't think, and for the life of me I could not stop shaking. Not knowing what was causing any of this, and because of how intense my symptoms were, I concluded that I had contracted some dreadful disease and that I was dying. Needless to say, I was terrified. It took some time, but with the help of some very wise therapists and healers, little by little, I came to realize that what I was experiencing was not any kind of physical disease, or even an emotional or mental breakdown. What I was experiencing was actually a type of healing crisis, a mind-body healing crisis known in transpersonal psychology as a spiritual emergency or spiritual crisis. While a spiritual emergency can be a very frightening experience for folks who are unsure of its symptoms or challenges, folks like me, once you have an understanding of the process and begin working with the symptoms or challenges rather than against them, it could be a profoundly transforming and liberating experience. For some of us, the most liberating experience of our lives. Some of the life events that can trigger a spiritual emergency include things like deep meditation or prayer, certain types of body work, physical or emotional trauma, sexual trauma, a near-death experience, childbirth, and yes, the hormonal changes of menopause, or more specifically, perimenopause. That's the 8 or so years before the menstrual cycles cease, when all of the upheaval can be most severe. Now, realizing I wasn't the only woman to experience this type of mind-body crisis during perimenopause, once I began to feel grounded and a bit more sane, I decided to write a memoir about my crisis and my healing. My hope being to bring some insights and support, and maybe even a little comfort to women undergoing similar struggles. So what I'd like to do now is go ahead and read the preamble from my memoir, and then the first chapter, July. That's the month when all of my symptoms and challenges first began to erupt. Then I'm going to fast forward and drop you straight into the middle of my crisis, 2 months into it, at the end of a chapter titled September. It was at this point that my physical and emotional upheaval had become so severe, and I had become so frightened that I began running from doctor to doctor, from hospital to hospital, desperate to find someone who could tell me what was happening to me, desperate to find someone who could help me to save my sanity and my life. And so without further ado, I give you these excerpts from Menopause in Crisis: When Spiritual Emergency Meets the Feminine Midlife Passage. A premonition. For the most part, I never saw my menopausal crisis coming. Sure, there were signs that I was heading for some sort of midlife breakdown, and to be honest, plenty reasons why I should have had one as well. After all, I had arrived at this time of my life carrying so much extra baggage, emotional baggage that had been haunting me in one way or another for decades. Still, since I had managed to hold back any sort of serious undoing for this long, for nearly half a century, why would I think everything would suddenly start coming apart just because I was going through menopause? What was there to make me think this time of my life was going to be so different from any other? Dream from a few months before my crisis. I'm driving along a country road in Columbia County, New York. It's a long, straight road with vast expanses of farmland stretching out in all directions. Off to the west, the Catskill Mountains rise up boldly into a cloud-cluttered sky. As I'm driving, I suddenly become aware of a tornado approaching, some ominous force of intense swirling energy powerful enough to tear up everything within this peaceful scene and smash it to bits. Frightened, I stop my car and start running toward a group of nearby homes while several other people on the road do the same. After rushing inside one of the houses, a small white one, I hurry into the kitchen and start down the stairs into the basement. Just as I'm about to begin my descent, my left hand firmly on the railing, I turn to someone next to me and say, "As long as I'm able to survive, I can do this. I have to be here for my sons. My sons need me. I have to make it out alive for my sons." July. It was a night in mid-July 2005 around 2 a.m. when I woke up to use the bathroom. I have to admit it was a pleasant surprise to discover I had been sleeping so soundly. So many other nights that summer the stirrings of menopause would not allow for that kind of luxury. Wet pajamas and damp sheets waking me often into a chilly sweat. Truth be told, there had been countless other nights throughout my life when insomnia had me in such a tight grasp it was a struggle to get even an hour of sleep. But this night was different. This night I was sleeping. But no sooner had I opened my eyes in those wee hours of that July night than I could sense that I wasn't going to be going back to sleep any time soon. Some sort of shakiness inside, nervousness, something. Throwing off the covers, I hurried into the bathroom when all of a sudden I could feel my whole body beginning to shake, my arms, my legs, even my feet, my mind filling with wild and senseless fear. That's when the worst of it started. Bam, bam, bam! Out of nowhere, my heart began pounding so hard and so fast that I could feel it in nearly every cell of my body. Not knowing what to do, I ran out into the kitchen. Bam, bam, bam! What was happening? Was I having a heart attack? Was my heart about to explode? Since I'd already had plenty of panic attacks over the years, I knew right away that this was something much, much different. It was far more frantic than anything I'd experienced before. Far more frantic and far more insistent. Bam, 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 bam! Something was wrong. Something was definitely wrong and getting worse with each terrifying bam I could feel inside my chest. Alone with only my two 15-year-old sons asleep in the house, I did something I never would have dreamed of doing before. I picked up the phone and dialed. In the middle of the night, the voice at the other end was a true comfort. 911, what is the nature of your emergency? My mind racing, my hands shaking so violently I could hardly hold a glass of water, I tried to relate to the dispatcher the nature of my emergency, an emergency I could neither identify nor explain. My heart is pounding, and my hands are shaking. My whole body is shaking. I think it must be something I ate, the meat, something. Do you want us to send an ambulance? The dispatcher asked. I hesitated, stalled, all the while struggling to figure out what I should do next. What do? I thought, clinging to the phone. My heart is beating so fast. What do I do? Not wanting to frighten my sons with ambulances and late-night sirens, I finally decided not to have the paramedics come, and instead to try and tough it out alone. With a husband who spent much of his time traveling for business, I was used to toughing things out alone, and figured once I was able to pull myself together, I'd be able to manage this as well. So after gathering all the consolation I could from the dispatcher, I took a deep, shaky breath and reluctantly hung up the phone. By this time, the pounding in my chest had begun to slow into a somewhat more familiar pulse, and although the shaking was still there, that too seemed to be subsiding. Still dazed, I crawled back into bed armed with a glass of water and high hopes that the episode had passed. Unfortunately, these hopes were all too quickly dashed as the instant I tried to lie down, the instant I tried to lay my head on the pillow so I could get some rest, My body became filled with feelings of such haunting agitation I could not lay still. Again and again I changed my position, and again the agitation, the intense restlessness returned. It was as if an explosion had occurred inside me, and now all the little pieces of debris were floating around inside my body, looking for a place to land or be released. Finally, after stacking enough pillows under my head to make my body more vertical than horizontal, I curled up into the tightest fetal position I could, closed my eyes and did my best to go back to sleep, only managing to doze off for a few minutes before the buzz of the alarm told me it was morning. Never before that night would I have thought that menopause, or more specifically, perimenopause, the 8 or so years before a woman's menstrual cycles cease, could bring on such intense bodily symptoms. Actually, what I believed about the change was that I'd simply sweat a few times, change my PJs once or twice, and then be done with the whole process. Since I'd been having some pretty intense hot flashes and night sweats in the weeks before my episode, however, I couldn't help but wonder if the two events could be related. Ever the consummate researcher, the next day I sat down at my computer, logged onto the internet, and typed the words perimenopause and night panic into the search engine. I don't think I really expected to find anything, but figured a few minutes of web surfing was worth the effort of trying to put my mind and body at ease. I could hardly believe my eyes when with one small click of the mouse, not just one, but several websites came up, one that astounded me. On the website, I discovered pages and pages of posts where dozens of other midlife women were writing about their experiences with perimenopausal night terror and panic, about their middle-of-the-night trips to the emergency room, and the various dosages of Xanax many of them needed to get through the night. Oh my gosh, I thought, if it's only perimenopause, I'll be fine. I'll be ready for it the next time and won't let it throw me off kilter so much. I was so relieved to learn that my middle-of-the-night panic was nothing more than a normal symptom of perimenopause, that I even started joking about it later that afternoon with my sons. Hey, could you imagine someone a little more high-strung like your aunt having one of these episodes? I chuckled. She'd be running around the house in a panic screaming, "Oh my God! Oh my God!" Yeah, unfortunately that hilarious moment of heckling didn't last long. A few days later I was on my way home after dropping my sons off at drama camp. It was a warm, sunny day, so I had the car windows open and was actually whistling, certain I had this whole perimenopause thing under control. All in all, I was feeling quite pleased with myself when all of a sudden, bam, bam, bam! Determined not to panic this time, I held tight to the steering wheel and pulled into a nearby diner. Bam, bam, bam! Relax, I thought, it's only perimenopause. Hands shaking and mind reeling, I reached into my purse, took out my cell phone and slipped it into the cup holder, just in case I did need to call the paramedics. Bam, 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 bam! Come on, Linda, steady now, breathe, breathe. But no matter how hard I tried to relax, no matter how hard I tried to calm myself down with some of the relaxation techniques I learned in my yoga training, the pounding would not let up. The pounding or the panic. As I sat there wondering what to do next, deep inside I could feel wave after wave of monstrous terror welling up from someplace deep inside me, each one threatening to wash me away in the undertow. Should I call the hospital, I wondered, my hand already on the cell phone? Oh my God. Oh my God. Fast forwarding to the end of September. Unlike earlier in my search for a diagnosis, I didn't feel any sense of elation over having made the appointment for an MRI. There were no eurekas shouted or even any whispered hopes that I'd soon have an answer for everything that had been happening to me. Actually, I was so far gone at this point that I didn't even believe I'd live to see morning. For the rest of the afternoon and on into the evening, I continued to feel as if I was hovering in between dimensions, in between worlds. Nothing felt sane, nothing felt solid, nothing even felt real. I was so convinced I was dying and so tired of fighting death that while lying in my bed later that afternoon, I decided to give up my fight and to try surrendering to death instead. Is there something a person needs to do in order to die, I wondered as I struggled to release my body? Is there an act of intention to it, an act of will? I could see the numbers on the clock next to my bed changing, 5:05, 5:06, 5:07, the minutes racing by. How long would it be before I was gone? How long? With my son standing nervously at my bedside, I was so certain this was the end that although I hadn't been inside a church in years, I started asking for a priest. "Where's the priest?" I shouted into the air that seemed to be growing thinner by the minute in my delusion. Shouldn't there be a priest? I'm dying, for God's sake. Shouldn't I at least have a priest come and give me my last rites? I looked over at my nightstand and could see the numbers on the clock still changing and couldn't understand why I was still breathing, why I was still alive. "I want to go for a walk," I announced suddenly, sitting up and lowering my feet to the floor. "I want to take the dog for a walk in the cemetery one last time before I die." Shaky from lack of sleep or maybe from sheer delusion, I climbed out of bed so my sons and I could take the dog to the cemetery. As we stepped outside into the cold autumn air, I could feel the wind howling and whining around us and see the sky shifting between a threatening gray and a more hopeful blue above. Somewhere underneath this hodgepodge of wind and weather, the four of us started down the road, my sons, my Aussie mixed terrier, and me. It was like so many other walks we'd taken over the years, walks filled with silliness and laughter. Only there was no laughter on this walk. There was no laughter, only sadness and fear. Sadness and fear for my sons, and madness, nothing but wild and desperate madness for me. We had only managed to make it a few steps past the cemetery gate when all of a sudden I could feel that pounding inside my chest beginning to intensify. Bam, bam, bam. It seemed as if there wasn't anything I could hear anymore, nothing I could feel but that wretched and relentless pounding. Bam, bam, bam. Oh, make it stop, I begged. Please, someone make it stop. My heart skipped a beat, and then another and another until finally the pounding did stop. The pounding stopped, and in its place there was nothing but a confused fluttering. I couldn't breathe. I could hardly stand. Is this it, I wondered? Is this the end? As I struggled to surrender into the spaces in between the fluttering, struggled to surrender to death, I could feel my legs beginning to collapse out from under me, and, in what felt like a sudden gust of wind, my son's arms folding into mine, catching me before I fell. "I can't go on," I mumbled, turning back toward the house. "Please, please take me home. I'm dying. I just want to go home." As soon as we got back to the house, I crawled onto the sofa and began staring out the window at a group of clouds that had gathered on the horizon. Every now and again I could feel myself slipping away, dozing off, only to be awakened by my son's startled voices. "Mom, Mom, are you okay? Mom!" I could almost feel myself floating among the clouds now, floating in between the colors of pink and gray that were about to disappear behind the trees. It felt as if I had already died and had become some sort of apparition, a ghost refusing to let go of the earth, while at the same time racing madly toward the sky. Again, it's important to keep in mind that, like many women, the physical and emotional upheaval I experienced during perimenopause was actually a call to healing. It was a time when my mind and body began working to release some of the emotional baggage I'd been carrying, so that I can begin the next stage of my life, the wise woman stage, with a sense of transformation and renewal. For more information about menopause and spiritual emergency, please refer to my website, where you'll find a few articles and radio interviews about feminine spirituality, mind-body practices, and healing, as well as other websites, links to other websites where you can get additional insights and support. You can also refer to the resource section at the back of my memoir. Now, because each woman's experience with menopause is different, should you be experiencing any midlife changes you're concerned about, please see a doctor. Believe me, I saw plenty. And preferably a doctor who has an awareness of perimenopause as a natural rite of passage and healing journey. This will help you to rule out any conditions which may require medical intervention and to acquire the appropriate guidance and support for your unique transition. Thanks so much for stopping by, and for those of you who have already begun your journey through perimenopause, I wish you an empowering, liberating, and rewarding transition. Many blessings to everyone. Thank you.